Happy New Year's Eve, everybody. I have been wanting to make a video about all the books I read in 2024, just for fun because I love reading and I love watching content about other people's book reviews and what they're reading, and that's how I get all my ideas of what to read. And of course, Ethan is a professional content creator, so we were gonna do it big and do a camera and have lights and all of that, but you know, holidays with kids, enough said. We just decided God made iPhones for a reason. So I'm just gonna use this iPhone and I'm gonna go through all the books that I read. So I read 15 books this year, and that's not a lot for an avid reader at all, but it was a lot for a new mom. So I not only felt great about all the books I read, some of them were really formative, and some of the best books I've read and most transformative books that I've read in my life. And so I just wanted to share them because that's how I found them, is that they were shared and just doing it for fun with friends. So I'm gonna go with top 10 books that I read, and I'm gonna go through each one really fast. I say really fast. I'm gonna talk a little bit about what I liked about each book, the top 10, and then I'm gonna do 5 honorable mentions. So hopefully you get some good reads out of it, and it's just fun to share what these books have meant to me. So let's do that. This first book is called Wild Things, and this is gonna have to be my top book of the year because I've said it before, if you've been around me and you are a boy mom, or you know, of really a boy of any age, I'm like, you need to read this book. It was so helpful. So for context, I grew up with a single mom. I grew up with a dad for a very small part of my life. And then God made me a boy mom of 2 little boys. And of course, I'm married to a great man. But I know nothing about boys. I know nothing about how to make them into men, how to be a parent to a boy, and there are some things that parents will always have to just pray it out and feel in the dark, but there are some things that I just didn't want to guess at when it came to raising boys. And I feel like this book answered all of it. So it's a psychological, physiological and psychological look at the mind of a boy and the way of a boy and the heart of a boy and how they grow up and what they need at every stage. And I'm telling you, this is not just for new parents. I have been talking to moms who are way more seasoned than me, and they're like, well, I have an 18-year-old boy. You still want this book because this book goes up to 24 years. But honestly, even if you have a son or a husband that is past that age, I just feel like this gives so much insight. And I joked about it. I posted about it a while ago that I had got this from the library and thought, I'm going to save money and not buy books. And then I said, I want this in a hard copy because I'm going to use this for the rest of my life. Just a phenomenal book. And I recommend to anybody who loves a man and has a man in their life. Okay, Practicing the Way. So this is by John Mark Comer, and of course he's written several other books that are really popular. The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, Live No Lies, which I'll talk about in a little bit, I reread this year. Practicing the Way was so formative to me because, if you've ever been, as a Christian, you've been walking with God for a while, you feel like you are really trying to discover what's next and, a deeper and truer way to worship God, and you feel stuck in that, this just provides a beautiful way of creating some meaningful practices. And he describes what the practices are. Of course, these would be like Bible reading, prayer, scripture, fasting, what we would call the spiritual disciplines. And I thought this was so formative to me because it really puts in the forefront of my mind every single day, what kind of habits am I placing in my life? And what kind of person am I becoming? Because those habits are really influencing who I'm becoming. And so I feel like this book helped me ask the daily question of who am I becoming today? And I recommend it as a read for anybody. My third top book is Raised to Stay. So this is, the author's name is Natalie Runion, and she runs an account called Raised to Stay. So you may follow her Instagram account. And last year, or this year, I'm already doing it. This year I picked up this book and ordered it, and she actually wrote another one, which is right under it, and I'll cover, is The House That Jesus Built, and I'll just go ahead and show this one too. So she wrote these back to back, and Raised to Stay is an amazing book for anybody who has experienced any kind of like disorientation when it comes to church and their experience with church. And she just has this beautiful testimony of some disorientation and some really hurtful experiences she's had. But then she doesn't use that in order to justify any sort of hate toward the church or not participating in the church, but actually why and how she stays committed to the church. And it's just the most beautiful thing. This was really pivotal to me this year. And so I feel like this book made it so far because it was just really helpful personally to me. And I think that anybody who has went through this would benefit from reading this book. And then she wrote The House That Jesus Built. And this is kind of a call and answer book of, this is how the hurt happens, and this is how we can be more discerning and make sure that it doesn't. And it just even gives the believer like just some personal lenses to look through, not just out at other churches, but really her call to personal responsibility of we have to be the church first. We have to be the people that Jesus calls us to be, so that our churches can be full of people that Jesus calls us to be, is great. Like, this isn't a critique really, like it is, but also it's more of an inward look of our own heart. So the cool thing about this is that if you pick this up hoping to be able to point fingers at somebody, it just points the finger right back at you. And I love a book that does that, because I think I pick up books ready to point fingers at people, and then I'm always appreciative of when I'm the problem. And then Sacred Fire. So Sacred Fire is a little bit hard to break down of why I loved it. Also, the author is a little bit controversial. I know that he's tied to like the Enneagram guy, the Universal Christ guy. He's referenced some of his things. So just know that, like when you pick up books, you chew meat, spit out bones. It's important to know what the author believes in. He talks a lot about desert fathers and, original church fathers and things like that. And he also talks about Christian mystics. And so again, it's like there's a lot going on here that probably could be looked into about like this guy's like full beliefs. However, everything I read in here was so solid. So this is a book. It's called A Vision for Deeper Humanity and Christian Maturity is the subtitle. And that's exactly what it is. It pleads the case that we can live a life of deep maturity, and that there are essentially 3 levels of Christian maturity, and that most of us only get past the first one, which is to get our lives together. And so most of us struggle all of our life to just get our lives together, but there's a deeper life that God calls us into. I think the biggest thing that I got from this, though, is that maturity is an option, which would really contradict with Mr. John Mark Comer when it comes to his book and Practicing the Way. I felt the rub between those 2 books a lot, this one and Practicing the Way. However, John Mark Comer has been influenced by this book for sure. He's read this book, and a couple of his followers have read this book. That's how I came to know about this book. And so I feel like that's the beautiful part of reading, is you can read all of these different authors and they are all telling a unified story, but may disagree on some certain things. I don't know what to say for this one other than that you should just read it. It's really, really good. And okay, like if it helps, it's hard to explain all the contents of the book. My biggest takeaway is that I don't fear death as much anymore. Like, this made me really at peace with the fact that we're going to die, and that if I live my life in the way that Jesus calls me to live my life, my death can be more meaningful like for the people that I love, for the people that I influence, even more so than my life. And if you want to know more about what that even means, this would be a great read for you. It's funny to even like let people know that I read this. I definitely got unfollowed this year for like revealing that I voted conservative, which is just really funny. But I actually like have never been hardcore conservative in my life. In fact, I would say that I've flip-flopped a lot and I've never really stuck with anything. And that is why for this election, I really wanted to read some more. And of course, I was watching Charlie Kirk videos along with everybody else. And I really wanted to read his book. And of course, he is very hard stance about lots of things. And he's very cutthroat, cut to the chase. But he's also very consistent in his character and the way that he shares the gospel and his belief in Jesus. And I just, these days, I appreciate people who are consistent. If they are nothing but consistent, then I respect them. And he is so consistent, and I feel like his faith informs his politics, not his politics informing his faith. My pastor talked a lot about that this election, and I feel like he really does that well. This book was so helpful to me. I know why I vote conservative after reading this book. And it feels funny, like I read all these Christian books and I feel more like controversial talking about this book and just revealing that I voted conservative online. Like it feels like a coming out sort of thing. I don't know why it's like that, but that's 2024 for you. But I read it and it's good. And honestly, like I just would recommend it to anybody to read who's like maybe flip-flopping or they are conservative or you're not really sure why. And there's a few things that you're still kind of like, but what about racism? What about feminism? Which I would say are my top two areas that I would always like, well, I could see this, I could see this, I could see this. And I feel like this book really helps me know what I believe about certain things. And the reason I'm even posting and revealing that I read this book and is because one of the impacts it made on me is to not really be liked. I don't really care so much about being liked anymore. I hope that it helps someone, and I would rather help people and help change the world than be liked. So back to lighter stuff. Labor with Hope. Oh, if you notice, I took all of the like sleeves off my books. I know that's kind of like book heresy for some, but I like it. So I've noticed that I've done that. So this one is called Labor with Hope, and this one is by Gloria Furman. She also has a co-author on this one, Jesse Schumann. This is just one of the most gorgeous books I have ever read. So it's for women, really moms of any kind. Like this is women who are pregnant, postpartum. It talks about adoptive mothers in here, stepmothers. This is a book for all mothers. And what this book does is draw parallels of the suffering of Christ to the suffering of motherhood and parenthood. And I buy this for like any pregnant person that I know. I just Amazon send it over because it is just one of the most beautiful things to read and meditate on. This book has inspired me to stop saying things to moms like, you're going to be okay, or you're doing great, or it's not going to be that bad. Like this book talks about embracing suffering and how that suffering acquaints us with the suffering of Christ in the most beautiful way that we would not be able to taste had we not gone through it. And it celebrates the suffering and what it teaches us. And so I just love this book so much. Okay, this one is called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. And this one is by Butterfield. What is her first name? Rosaria Butterfield. This woman is amazing. She is a fantastic writer. Try to look her up. She has no Instagram, no social media at all. She wrote this book, and it's about hospitality and Christian hospitality, and it really challenges that if we're Christians, our house should be open. This is how we share the gospel. This is how Jesus did it. But that's not all this book is about. She covers a wide array of topics somehow, some way in this book, and they're so challenging and so thought-provoking. And I really recommend this to any Christian. Like, I think this is just one of those staples that Christians should have. It talks about hospitality, and there's even a part where, she talks about, well, what about if people, what if people betray you? And what if you let people in and they betray you? Or, they open their house, that's their whole thing, and their house got broken into and they had stuff stolen. And they talk about how they walk through all of that with their kids and family. And then they talk about family tension. I mean, it's just beautiful. And I think everybody would benefit from reading it. The Other Half of Church. This was recommended to me by a family member. And it's a little bit hard to explain the premise of the brain chemistry, which is what it goes through. But I wanted to talk about these books that are a little bit more in depth, and that honestly I could read 5 more times and get new things out of. I try to just say my biggest takeaway. So my biggest takeaway from The Other Half of Church is there's a discussion on healthy shame versus toxic shame. Because a big part of this book is about group identity, and it talks about correcting correctly, and how lots of churches will shame and use toxic shame, or families will use toxic shame, and like, you're so bad, you're not supposed to do this, and send them out alone to deal with the problem. But really, all issues, all sins, all corrections should be dealt with relationally, because that's what God does. He pulls us close when we sin. If we believe in Jesus, he does not push us away. Like, sin does separate, but because of Jesus, God can pull us close in our sin, and we can repent of our sin. And I feel like I had so many ideas challenged that were from this book, but then they also just made sense. Like, everything makes sense. I really recommend this book. It's the subtitle is Christian Community, Brain Science, and Overcoming Spiritual Stagnation. So there's a lot there. I really recommend this. Okay, last top read of 2024 is Live No Lies. So I read this in 2023 as well, and I wanted to read it again because this is a lot. This is another John Mark Comer book. John Mark Comer is a human anthology. He reads so many books, and I mean, like, these pages are just riddled with other scholarly work, all kinds of quotes, of course, the Bible. And the big thing about Live No Lies is to recognize and resist the 3 enemies that sabotage your peace. So as Christians, we can get in ruts of blaming the devil and everything, or blaming the world and the news and the other people, or we can blame ourselves. But there are actually all 3 of them: the world, the flesh, and the devil. And he helps you distinguish at any given time which one you're dealing with. And this is just another book that any and every Christian would benefit from, just having this in their pocket and knowing how to distinguish those 3 enemies and how to combat them with spiritual truth and spiritual disciplines, and be able to live a life of peace. Like, that's the whole thing, is that they sabotage your peace, and that we can live more joyful lives, more peaceful lives, if we are able to recognize what we're dealing with and be able to combat them. Just a great book that, again, I read it a second time and got all these new different things from it. Okay, and then quick honorable mentions. So Upon Waking, you can't really see any of the writing, but Upon Waking is a devotional by Jackie Hill Perry. I started the year with this devotional, and it was perfect whenever Titus was born. He was born on January 19th. And so just having a devotional to go to that was short, but also it was really punchy. And of course, she's a poet. She is a beautiful writer. And so the sentences, the content, she's also a theologian. So it's just gorgeous, and it's thought-provoking. Sometimes the critique on devos is they're just not deep enough, and this is not, you would not run into that problem if you have this. And then the last thing he told me is a fiction book, and really cool. If you read this, there's on Apple TV a series that was made out of this book, and this is just a great. It's Laura Dave, great like thriller, but really like when people ask me like I want to read like good fiction that's clean, because you know you can't always get that. This is perfect. The Last Thing He Told Me. It's just good reading. And then Forgiving What You Can't Forget. This is another Christian book on forgiveness. And if you just are trying to forgive anybody in your life, this is a great book to get. Two books that I don't have in copy that are also my honorable mention. The first is The Greatest Gift by Voskamp. I posted about that this December. I read that every December. It is a Christmas Advent devotional. The 25 days leading up to Christmas, and I read that every year. I read it this year. I recommend getting that for next December. And then I got a Kindle for Christmas, and so I got to squeeze one more read, and it was The Stranger in the Lifeboat by Mitch. I think it's Albom. I think I'm saying that wrong, but it was a great fiction read. So I'm reading another Laura Dave book, the author of The Last Thing He Told Me, and she is such a good story writer. But what I loved about The Stranger in the Lifeboat is the dialogue was written so well. So if you love fiction and you want the story to be like, it was a great story, lots of twists and turns, but also just paced very well. The dialogue was written so well in that book. So hopefully I can get my husband to help me put pictures of the books that I have in person. But if not, I'll just write it down in Instagram. So thanks for watching this. Hopefully you got some good reads out of it, and I'm excited to read in 2025.